So next, and last but not least, finally, David. David is, as I mentioned in the morning, dear friend. I got to know him through Goiko. We ran together the Product Owner Survival Camp. He has a lot to say about user stories, but today he will talk about testing. David will be also back in December in Vienna, so if anyone's interested, just visit our website on that.
That's right.
Thanks, David.
Thank you very much. I don't need an alarm to tell me my talk's about to start, so I'll switch that off. Yes, it's the end of the day, so therefore it's a talk about testing, isn't it? Yes. What's wrong with this picture? No. Of course, there's been several great talks about testing throughout the day, as it should be. It's a great pleasure to be here on, a great event, a stellar lineup. My thanks to Christian and TechTalk and the organisers for inviting me to help close your day. So this is a talk that I call the Pillars of Agile Testing, and my subtitle here is that it's sort of about the things I've learned about classical architecture in the process of realizing that if I'm going to borrow an analogy of classical architecture in describing a model, I probably ought to learn a little bit about the basis of that model. And it turns out that everything I've learned is completely new, and everything I originally had in the model was wrong. But we'll get to that. So what's in this talk? Well, I'll be sharing with you a model that you may find useful. A little bit about how it was evolved, although I'm not going to go too deeply into that in the interest of time. But it's essentially about how you can use this as a way of assessing or understanding the deeper issues behind, can you improve, can you succeed, can you go further with agile testing within your organization, and what might be the blockers that might get in the way of that. I will be introducing some classical architecture terms and curious. So if you're not particularly interested in the model, at least you'll learn something about Greek temples. There's also a little technique I use here in recognition that a lot of people take notes at conferences just by photographing the slides they're interested in. I'm using Prezi, which is the thing that sort of zooms in and out and so forth, and there's a couple of things that have some builds on them. I realise that can cause a bit of havoc for people who are trying to take photographs because they're never quite sure when the bus stops, as it were. So I will put a little brown photo icon in the corner when this is a good photo opportunity. You can take a photo, I'll take a drink, everybody's happy, we'll move on. Another quick sort of declaration or caveat. There is another Agile consultant working in the Agile testing space called Bob Galen. He's based in America. Now he has coincidentally created what you could describe as a similar model. He's written a book, let's get the name exactly right, The 3 Pillars of Agile Quality and Testing, okay? Now there's no suggestion of any plagiarism, anything like that. It's not that uncommon for people to use something like pillars as a metaphorical idea for a model, so lots of people do that. So Bob has come up with a similarly named model to mine, but it's not the same thing. I invite you to go and follow the link to go and check out his. Okay, so that's what's inside. Let's crack on. So here's the executive summary. If you remember nothing else, this is what this is about. To succeed with agile testing in your organization, there are 4 things that I think are important that you should be striving for. If you like, these are your Tom Guild qualities, the things you need to improve. And they are providing stronger evidence, creating better tests, getting greater coverage, and providing faster feedback. Those are the 4 things you really want to be improving. However, to do that, there are a number of things you need to have in place in order or you will be limited by how much you can improve each of those things. And those foundations, if you like, or the supports for those fall into 3 categories. There's making sure we've got appropriate collaborative team structures, we've got the right skills and capabilities within our people, and that we've got the right technical foundations in place. That is essentially what this model is about. But before I launch into the model itself, I need to give a little bit of my axioms, if you like, my starting point. So I did a keynote at a conference quite a long time ago where, I started with this question: what is the product of testing? And it came from the situation that before I became independent, working these days alongside Goiko Edzich and a couple of other smart people, but before I did that, I was working for quite a large software quality consultancy. And we were sort of, suffering the usual problem of there was competition around. I think they'd had it fairly easy for a while, but now there were lots of other organisations out there, in particular people who were offering bodies who could test, not necessarily good testing services, but they could offer testers cheaper than we could. We weren't the cheapest guys on the street. And so the senior management of this organisation charged me with this problem of, well, how do we stop the rot? How do we prevent this race to the bottom of who can provide the cheapest resources? And I said, well, it should be fairly obvious. Most marketplaces understand that this is not a homogeneous product. I knew that was going to happen. This rather flimsy thing was going to fall off my ear. Oh, and now oh my God. There we are, we're back to the right spot. So, if you're in the market for cars, okay, some people are going to buy the Lada at a cheap price, some people are going to buy the Mercedes at a higher price because they know they're trading the cost for something that's a better quality product. And all we need to do is convince the market that we're the luxury brand. You can go off and get your cheapest testers by the hour if you want, but if you want more and better high quality testing, you come to us and you pay appropriately for it. But that kind of just shifted the problem a little bit. That said, well, okay, so what is our product? What's the thing that we're actually giving to our customers when they pay us, if it's not just a bum on a seat? So the answer to that question, I hope you realise, is not the obvious one that might be coming to mind. It's not the Q word. You're not getting more quality as a result of doing more and better testing. You're getting information about quality that hopefully is useful to the people who care about that information. But good testing doesn't guarantee good quality. Good quality depends on what do you do with the information that you get from good testing. So my substitute answer is that what we're providing is confidence to our stakeholders about the choices they have to make. So everybody's going to make some hard decisions. Sometimes we're making those several times a day. Are we ready to sort of push this live? Maybe you're still in a situation where you're only releasing sort of, much less frequently than that. It's still a big and difficult decision, but you've got to be confident about that that's the right decision. And as I say, it's not just always about the confidence to say yes. Sometimes you need to be confident that the right answer is no. The risk is too great, quality is not good enough, the features aren't there, the returns aren't there, whatever. If you've had good testing to give you that answer, then you can at least make the right decision, confident that that was the right decision. So this is my axiom, that the product of testing is confidence. So the model is based on the idea that that's ultimately the thing we're trying to increase. We're trying to give our stakeholders, our clients, greater confidence in their decisions. So that ultimately is the product that sort of sits at the top of this model. Okay, so that was my starting axiom. Christian kindly mentioned in this morning's introduction that this model, I think the term he used, I think, was based on this book. Well, it was written up in this book. So can I ask just a quick survey? Has anyone owned this book or familiar with this book? More Agile Test by Lisa Christman? Yep, there are a few. Don't know if those people have reached page 402 yet of the book. Okay, so chances are this is going to be new stuff to most people. Lisa sort of, objected a little when I made light of the fact that my model appears right at the back of the book. She said, "Well, yeah, but that's because it summarizes all the ideas. It's the thing that wraps up the book, Okay, so yeah, this is in print and it's available towards the back of this book. And of course, there's lots of other very good material for you to discover before you get to page 402. I recommend going out and getting it. So let's crack on. What I said in this in the book, or in the introduction to this section of the book, is that, okay, I've got this model called the Pillars of Testing, and I represent this model as a Greek temple, and that Greek temple has a roof, it's got the pillars, and it's got foundations. And I had, various bits and pieces of words that sort of sat on this image of a temple to represent the elements of the model. And as I say, having sent this off to Lisa and Janet for inclusion in their book, they loved the ideas, great, went in, and I kind of thought afterwards, maybe I should have checked that those things that I was calling it were right. And so I did, a little bit of research. It turns out that pretty much everything I'd said was completely wrong. If I had the opportunity to do it again, this is what I should have said, is that I represent the model as a tetrastyle Doric temple, which has a pediment, yes, that is a real word, a pediment, columns, not pillars, columns, and crepidoma. Any Scrabble fans, you're suddenly getting lots of extra words that you can get a decent score out of. Now, okay, so here's a test. I'm sure this is an educated crowd at Agile Tour Vienna. I know there are probably some people who know a thing or two about classical architecture. So here's your audience participation bit. Who knows why? Well, okay, I'll start with the easy bit. The tetrastyle is easy. That's because it has, yes, it has 4 columns, tetrastyle. Other types of temples are hexastyle, which have, yes, exactly, well done. But why is it a Doric temple?
Column style.
Aha, yes, somebody mentioned the columns. What specifically about the columns? Ooh, well, it's not the tapering, but you're close to it. Let's zoom in.
They don't have the things.
Oh gosh, you smart people around here. Yes. Okay. So it's to do with the style of the capital on top of the column here. Okay. And because this is sort of just a plain rounded thing, that's known as the abacus, which sits under the square bit, which I think is the echinus. That is typical, or that is the defining style of the Doric order. So the Doric order is just one of 3 orders, and each of them dictates, or each of them leads to a different style of capital. So yes, that's the Doric capital on our left here. It was mentioned that the sort of the curly bits, or those are correctly termed volutes. So Ionic temples have volutes, they're the scrolly bits, and the more elaborate later period Corinthian order are the ones that have the funny leafy bits. They're known as the leafy bits. No, strictly they're known as acanthus leaves. Acanthus leaves. So yes, 3 classical Greek capitals. That's in contrast to modern Greek capitals, of which there is only 1. Difficult. I'm trying to make light of a difficult subject here. Or Roman capitals, of which there are 26. Yes, laugh, damn it. Gosh. Yeah, well, it's okay. When I get invited to the Austrian typesetting conference, they're going to love this joke, Okay, let's crack on with it. So what is this? What are the pillars? Well, it's a model that works for me. I'm indebted to Joachim, who's already dissected the word model rather nicely. I take he described it as a simplified description. I go a step further, and I like to use George Box's quote: "All models are wrong, but some are useful." So consider this to be a model that's wrong. I hope you find it useful. The other point to note is that it's worked for me. Your mileage may vary. Okay, again, another standard Agile caveat. Just because this works in my context doesn't necessarily guarantee yours. So yeah, that's the caveats out of the way. The model represents a set of things that you can create or improve within your Agile testing process. So I've talked about I've given you a preview of what the four are, but perhaps most importantly, I think this is where the value of the model comes. It also looks at what are the implicit relationships and dependencies between things that might prevent you from being able to improve those things. But it's not a process definition, okay? This is not a step one, do this, step two, do that. That's your Agile testing done. It's really a way of helping you examine the success of Agile in your organization. I've skipped the bit about history because that's probably only of limited interest. Suffice to say that I developed this over a number of years. It's gone through various iterations from trying to be overly complex and then too crashingly simple, and I'm hoping that at the stage it is now, it's kind of struck the right balance. So here's your first, or here's some more classical Greek education. So this model, because we're starting with our goal, so unlike the architects who actually have to build temples, this is just a metaphorical temple. We don't have to start from the foundations and work upwards. We can start from the high value thing at the top and work down. So we're going to be drawing or building our model top down. So yes, as I mentioned in the intro, the very top part, the sort of triangular part at the top of the temples is known as the pediment. But that in itself sits on top of a layer that's known as the entablature. And the entablature has a number of odd little architectural elements to it, which include the metopes and the triglyphs. I gave this talk recently, and a guy said, he devised a brand new joke. He said, oh, where do fans of classical Greek architecture go to meet other people with a similar interest? They go to a metopes. I thought that was terrible, but yeah. Generally, jokes about Greek classical architecture are pretty bad. Well, more on that later. So, triglyphs and metopes. Here's a little example of a metope. This was taken into safekeeping by Lord Elgin from the Parthenon in Greece, and it's still being carefully looked after in the British Museum until the Greeks are, old enough to be able to look after it themselves. So yes, typically these very nice bas-relief details in the little gaps in the entablature. What about our entablature? Okay, our entablature is what confidence rests on, or what does confidence comprise, if you like? Well, I see it as a combination of these two things, safety and courage. So safety is perhaps the element most commonly associated with testing. That is, we test to feel a greater degree of safety. We test to make sure it's safe to move forward, it's safe to release. But my point here is that you can't optimize for one alone. You could take the other view and say, well, Agile is all about courage, moving forward quickly, moving forward, having the courage to change direction, to release fast, and so forth. Again, if you optimize for any one of these things, you'll lead to a dysfunction. If I just said, your goal is to be my safety guy, okay? Make sure I'm safe. Don't let any harm come to me. That's your one job. Well, you'd instruct me not to get out of bed in the morning. So clearly, safety as a goal in itself is not a useful thing. Safety without some kind of incentive to move forward and get out and try and take risks would lead to stasis and inaction. Courage, unbridled, would just lead to foolhardiness. So I think confidence is a nice equal balance of those two things. So those are the two things that sit in our entablature that the pediment of confidence rests upon, safety and courage. The entablature rests upon our columns/pillars. If I sometimes slip between the two terms, forgive me. I still talk about the pillars of testing. The correct term is columns. I try to correct myself, but I still talk about pillars now and then. Now, one of the intelligent members of the audience talked about the tapering of the columns. Okay, put your hand up. Who did that? Who mentioned the tapering? You're not admitting it now because you think I'm making you. Okay, thank you. Up the back, yes. So, for your benefit, that's known as entasis. You probably knew that. So entasis, refers to the tendency for classical columns to be slightly tapered towards the top, or slightly narrower at the top than they are at the bottom. And the entasis is more pronounced on Roman columns than it is on Greek columns, but Greek columns still have it. So if you're drawing them, you always have to draw them not entirely straight. So in our model, what are the pillars? Well, the pillars are the measurable, valuable things that we want to improve. And the way I see it is that you always have these things, okay? Every organization has these 4 things, they just have them in different degrees. So they're useful to us because they're always things that we should say, whatever we think we're doing here, we should be able to improve this aspect. We should be able to have more of this. Okay, now look away if you suffer seasickness, because we've got to turn our column on its side here. The first of these is stronger evidence. Okay, so this is about how well do our stakeholders understand what has been tested and when. I said earlier that testing is not about creating quality, but about creating information about quality. And so the idea of being able to provide stronger evidence is about what is the case we are making. The other thing that's useful here is that evidence sort of brings with it some kind of suggestion of a courtroom analogy. And I do often use that. It's important to remember that in our role in testing or in quality assurance or whatever way you view your relationship to testing, it's easy to think, well, I'm judging this software. I'm judging how good it is. And we need to be a little bit careful with that. Because if we are taking a courtroom analogy, a tester is not a judge. It's our business is the judge. Our stakeholders, the people who are sort of stumping up the money, putting their money at risk, they're the ones, they will be the judge ultimately of quality. But the role that we do serve is that of the expert witness. Because if you think, what is your role? You are providing some expertise, deep technical understanding. You've done a lot of work that sort of is hidden from the average layperson, the average stakeholder, and how compelling your evidence is, how convincing your testimony, I love that word because it's got test in it, all depends on how well we're able to communicate the relevance of what we've done, the relevance of our background and our knowledge, the validity of the evidence we're presenting, the relevance of it, and being able to express all of that in terms that are meaningful to the people that need to make those judgments. So all of that really comes down to, you could say, well, okay, that's just communication, isn't it? But I think it's a multi-layered thing. It's not just communicating, making sure we're speaking to people, it's making sure we're saying the things that they need to hear at the right time and in the right mode, and making sure it goes directly to the right people. So that's what stronger evidence is all about. Okay, column number 2 is about providing better tests or better test design. So remember that testing is essentially an activity in an infinite space. It's often said, you never finish testing, you only ever stop it. There's always an infinite number of possible tests you could create. Good testing is about understanding what are the better tests to create and what are the less good tests to write. So it's about appropriateness, how meaningful, how effective they are. And there's another model within the model here that might be useful. I'm sure everyone here is familiar with Maslow's hierarchy of needs. And this is a model that's supposed to represent, well, what are the things that human beings seek out, placing those in some kind of relationship to each other. So there is sort of the very basic level of needs that is listed here as the physiological needs, breathing, having enough air and water, sex, sleep, and so forth. Then there's, with those satisfied, there's, am I going to survive the night? Is the cave safe and so forth? Do I have security? And then with those satisfied, you move into these higher level concerns like, love and belonging, self-esteem, and ultimately, our very first world modern issues like, morality, creativity, a sense of self, a sense of acceptance, and so forth. You might be looking at this and thinking, oh, there's a duplication in there. You think, why is sex mentioned there and there? That one is sex with another person. That's the other one. So Goiko and I liked the idea of this model as an analogy for software. So we sort of had this discussion about, well, could you create a Maslow-like hierarchy of needs in the context of software quality and software testing. So this idea, this is made it into our book, available on Amazon and LeanPub, where we talk about being able to see value at different levels and being able to see beyond the obvious level, where the obvious level is really probably the bottom level, maybe the bottom two. These are the traditional areas that people tend to focus their testing effort on. I'm doing functional tests. I'm testing that the system does what it does. And maybe if I'm lucky, I'm testing that it does it under load, or I'm testing that it does it reasonably securely and so forth. The so-called sort of non-functional or ilities type testing. But more and more, especially we're in the age of high competition for potential markets and users of our software, the attention turns away from those basic sort of functionality type issues and into issues of, well, is this actually being used? And people finding it useful? And those who are using it, are they actually finding it beneficial? Is it actually helping people to change or improve their behavior? So it's closely connected to what Goiko and Christian talked about in their impact mapping session. It's to what extent is our software actually leading to an improvement about the things that people would otherwise already be doing? It's very rare that your software is really there, that people are out waiting to get their hands on it because they love using your software. No, they don't. People would rather not use your software if they didn't have to. People have got things they need to do. Your software should be about helping them to get that done and get it done quicker or more safely, or in some contexts, by having more fun. And indeed, even if you've got people who are sort of quite delighted with your software, are they delighted enough to stump out some hard-earned cash for it? So are you actually getting a profit returned on your, well, I was going to say your investments, but from now on I'm going to use Spotify's terms, are we winning back on our bets? That's really what the business wants to know. And you might say, well, yeah, but David, the bottom of this pyramid is where testers live, I'm afraid. And, it's the people in boardrooms who live at the top of this pyramid, and that should be their concern for measuring those things. Well, I will accept some of that argument, but I would also like to say, yeah, but you've got skills in being able to run experiments. You've got skills in being able to ask appropriate questions. You've got skills in searching for evidence that you might only be applying at the lower levels of this pyramid, but why not encourage, why not help, why not coach people to take the same kind of approach of evidence-based data gathering, of A/B testing, of those sorts of things, further up this hierarchy. Because again, as was said in the context of impact mapping, it's easy to test the things lower down simply because they are closer to us. They are firmly within our zone of control. As you go further up here, you're starting to get into areas that you can only influence. And so you might give up and say, well, it's too hard to know whether people find this useful because I'd have to go out there into the real world and talk to real users. And who wants to be doing that? Well, you should be wanting to do that. That's where you're getting closer to the money. You're getting closer to the real picture of, is this going to be a winning bet? Okay. Point number 3 is about coverage. So that is how much of the system is tested compared to our models of risk. Okay? There's that word model again. So when we talk about coverage, our coverage is always in reference to models. You never cover the thing itself, that is the system and how valuable, how useful that is. When you're measuring coverage, you're measuring an approximation of that. So here's my 2 statements. You can have complete coverage of a model, but you can never have a complete model. That is, the model is never the thing. And you can attempt to make your model more complete. You can make it more sophisticated. You can make it closer to the reality. But in doing so, the less it makes sense to economically cover in terms of saying, I've got 100% coverage of this model. So the fairly obvious thing that I'm sure people are familiar with would be the standard I guess people cling to is the idea of statement coverage. Because it's an easy thing for our test tools to provide, we can say, okay, you ran your suite of automated tests and that exercised 78% of the lines of code in your product. And because the machine can give that to us automatically, we take that and we think, thanks very much. That's my model and that's my coverage level. Forgetting that that's just one representation. It's also a pretty poor representation of the thing that you actually want to check. You want to check that people like this software. You want to check that this is making positive improvements to people. So measuring how many lines of code are good is a pretty bad representation of that because, I'm sorry, your customers don't buy your software by the line. So be aware of the limitations of your model and also be aware that, when you're proud of the fact that I've got some, 80, 90, 95% statement coverage, well, then start considering condition coverage, MCDC. There are more complex models that are still based on lines of code that will show that those numbers start dropping down significantly. But no matter which sort of code-based model you choose, that's still not the thing that really matters, which is how are people responding to your software. Okay, and the final pillar or column is about faster feedback. And arguably, everything we've talked about so far is applicable in any context, Agile or otherwise, but this is the one that we kind of need to major on for Agile testing. So it's about how quickly do we identify problems in our software and their remedial actions. That one's quite important. So as I said before, we provide information about quality. Our success with delivering software is about how quickly we respond to that information and do the right thing. So feedback is not just about understanding a test result, it's about knowing what do I do next as a result of the information this test is giving me. So just very quickly, remember there are wheels within wheels in terms of our feedback loops. One, arguably lowest level one is right at that unit test level. I write some code, how quickly do I have a passing unit test for that? Next layer up might be, okay, I've implemented some story or I've implemented a feature. How quickly can I prove I've got that satisfying my acceptance tests and I've actually integrated that into the software? Maybe our next level is, okay, having built a bunch of new features, am I validating this or getting some kind of meaningful opinion from people, from my stakeholders saying, do you like these new features? What should we do with this? And how often is that actually hitting, real people in a real environment, solving real problems? It's all very well for the stakeholders to say, yeah, I like the color of that button or not, but how often is this actually getting out and getting proper feedback out in the real world? And touching back upon our Maslow hierarchy, is this converting into money? And once again, this has already been mentioned before, just because those are longer feedback cycles doesn't mean that they're not important to track. So I like the phrase of, it was mentioned of, Goike told the story of someone in Microsoft going back and saying, yeah, check all those lofty statements made in PowerPoints for these software initiatives that we undertake. And exactly how many of those did positively hit the numbers they were expecting. And it's a sadly low percentage. Okay, so when you think about feedback, remember there are multiple feedback cycles, okay? And you should be looking to tighten each one because that's ultimately it's the further out you are, the greater value is associated with that feedback cycle. Okay, those are the pillars. As I said, the idea is that every one of these is something that you can improve. My advice is that you look at your process and say, am I over-optimizing for any one of these things, possibly at the expense of something else? Is the top of my my temple lopsided because I'm good at one thing but I'm not so good at another. So you're looking at trying to grow or heighten these things in balance with each other. Okay, but that was a somewhat dry run through the middle, so let's lighten up and give you a genuine ancient Greek joke. So there is a writer, Philogelos, if that's the correct pronunciation, who assembled what was arguably the first joke book. So this is around 400 AD. He collected all of the funniest things that were going around the I guess the villas of the time, and these are recorded. These are the earliest recordings of jokes. The trouble is they're not really particularly funny. So I'll give you just one, and we'll see how we go with it. But it is a genuine one. So they like to make fun of academics or scholars. So lots of their jokes are about sort of so-called wise men who aren't all that wise. So the joke goes that a scholar decides that he's going to go swimming for the first time. So he goes into the lake, but because he'd never swum before, he nearly drowns in the process. So he just manages to scramble out. And so he swears to himself he's never going to go in the water again until he's properly learned how to swim. Yeah, and I'd say that was the best of a bad bunch, really. So, it just proves that the old jokes are the oldest. So we've looked at our pediment, our entablature, our columns. Now we're going to look at the crepidoma, which is these sort of steps that these columns sit on. The crepidoma also have specific names. So the top layer of the crepidoma is known as the stylobate. The steps below that are known as the stereobate. There you go. This is true stuff, folks. In our model, this is where we have the things that need to be solid, if you like, in order for us to make sure that the pillars above can actually stand up. Now, in the book, I call these foundations. As I say, I didn't know the word crepidoma, so I still call them foundations. So to the left, sort of holding up our pillars of strong evidence and better test design, are what I call the team foundations. Now, the top layer, collaboration and communication, everything kind of on this top layer, you could say, is really Agile 101. They're the kind of things that you're already told, oh, you must have this. That's fine, but the difficulty is always, well, why is it not working for us? We told everyone to go and collaborate and communicate. Why is it not happening? Why are we not suddenly Agile? So what I want you to focus on is, okay, what might be the things that are sitting underneath us that are in some way impediments or preventing success with the things above? And to my mind, the things that most commonly prevent having appropriate collaboration communication is that we don't have the right team structures and we don't have appropriate business engagement. Either teams still have testers sitting in one area and developers in another, or they are virtually together, but in real terms, their sort of reporting lines sort of mean there's a conflict in having a shared team goal. There's all sorts of impediments and problems with that. And another pernicious problem is not having appropriate access to the people who have the right knowledge in the business. So your product owner might be a proxy to that, but often it's too much to ask that product owner really is the entire source of truth. I think things like XP and Scrum sort of are somewhat hopeful that you can designate a single product owner and expect them to be the person who really does know everything that the team needs to know about the product they're building. I think that's a grand hope rather than a reality. So being able to have appropriate business engagement from other people outside the team and making sure the team is organised in a way that it's easy to get that information from them is essential to effective collaboration and communication. In the middle, sitting under our pillars of better design and greater coverage, is really some things that are almost like things that have arguably been left behind a little bit with the Agile revolution when it comes to testing. So I've used the general term of test techniques here. This is really the stuff that, because we might have associated with testing in a waterfall context, we think therefore it must be bad. And we apply this kind of four legs good, two legs bad kind of mentality to anything that sort of predated 2000 is therefore a bad idea. Well, there are actually some very, very useful test techniques. Go out and read some of your old textbooks, speak to some of the older people in your organisation, mention boundary value analysis, and you'll get these sort of tests. Wait, who said that? Who said that? There are useful things that we've been doing in testing, for a long time that are still applicable in Agile context. The appropriate use of those test techniques depends on having the appropriate skills and experience within your organisation. And again, that seems like a bit of a truism, so let's look at some more detail on how that might be useful. Here, I put the full credit on here. I'm indebted to some friends of mine who developed this working at Bank of America in London. So Dan North has been on the conference circuit talking about this. I think he's given it the name delivery mapping. Some people think that's a bit of an odd name for it. Anyway, the other guys involved in this were John Whitaker, Tom Roden, and Ben Williams. And so they look at how do you appropriately spread the skills and experience within your organisation. So they divide this map up into the skills that the organisation needs, that's pipeline, the things that people want to learn about, that's aspiration, and there's the things that people can already do, that's capability. And therefore there's all the various intersections. So for example, things that people want to do but don't necessarily align with the organisation's need, well, that's something they can do in their own time, elective learning. Whereas things that people can do at the moment but want to learn more, that's something they can do, they can practice, but again, it's on their own time. More interesting is what is useful for the business, okay? Things that some people can do and the business needs this, that's what you should be teaching others to do internally. What about things that people want to do but they don't know at the moment and the business needs it? Well, stump up the money for some training. That's where you're going to need to get these skills from outside. And I guess the last important area is where some people know stuff, other people want to know this, and it's important for the business. That's the stuff you kind of need to maximise the opportunity to spread through appropriate pairing, through brown bag sessions, formal and informal training, any means of sharing that knowledge amongst your organisation, because that is the gold. That's the stuff right in the middle. And the other categories here, one to watch out for is, look out for the things that you know the organisation needs, but at the moment nobody knows it and nobody particularly wants to know it. That's a danger sign. You need to sort of perhaps reconsider your strategy for that. And there we are. That is the completion of that model. There's your brown sign. Okay. Our final set of foundations are the technical foundations, and these again provide greater coverage or support greater coverage and faster feedback. And again, it's somewhat obvious, well, automate, automate, automate is another one of those agile truisms that we've had for many years, but what is it that makes this hard? Well, we had interesting stories this morning. I attended Dirk's session on BDD in finance this morning, where for various reasons they were applying BDD, but automating those BDD scenarios was a bitch, basically, because of the application architecture. Everything had to be done end-to-end. There was no easy way to isolate the appropriate components. I see this pattern or this anti-pattern over and over again. Automation becomes hard, it becomes costly, becomes tiresome, becomes wasteful, and ends up, we give up on it because we simply haven't thought about testability in terms of our architecture and design. So designing our applications for testability from the first place is what gives you, huge returns on ease of automation subsequently. So application testability is one thing, good configuration management is the other. Again, I hope I'm preaching to the converted here, but just for the avoidance of doubt, what we mean here is that I see config management as an umbrella term for a number of important engineering disciplines. Good source code control, release and version management, test data management, and environment management. And if you don't have a good handle on all of these, it's all the enthusiasm of testers is kind of put to waste because they won't get the leverage they need out of appropriate test automation. So treat your test automation with the same discipline that you would treat the rest of your production code. So those are the technical foundations. Now, sitting under each of those are some slightly fuzzier things, okay? So this third layer on our crepidoma, notice we've got management and leadership on the one side and good engineering discipline on the other side. So everything that's sort of in the top two levels is sort of something you can deal with within your team, but maybe there are some underlying problems there that are limiting how much you can do because you either don't have the strength of will of management teams to go and break down some of these silos and go and allow people to work the way they need to work. Maybe there's just a lack of a culture of engineering discipline in an organization. That's why tests aren't version controlled appropriately and so forth, because no one has ever sort of thought that was an appropriate thing to do with those tests. So these are sort of the bases on which these sit. It's not the end of it's not the bottom of the temple, however. There is one extra element architecturally to our temple, and that's known as the youth interior. Strictly, it's the uppermost course, but think of it as simply the foundations of the temple. Now, youth interior is an interesting word. If anyone else has teenage kids, that's the image that comes to mind when I think a youth interior. But no, it's not that. It's a youth interior. It is the bottom of our temple. Arguably, it's what is the bedrock? Where is the substrate upon which we built this? In our model, that's our organizational culture and its values. So everything that we see above this is really a function of or influenced by the thing below. And maybe you're sort of getting to this point, you think, well, okay, there's the rub. You know, in my organization, we don't have a culture of sort of respecting tests as first-class engineering objects, and you know, it's just an afterthought. Well, as they say, well, change your organization or change your organization. It's also the case that the reality of what each of these things mean in sitting above probably looks different depending on the lens of organizational culture that you're looking through. So maybe what it means when you think what do each of these pillars and their foundations look like in my organization, it probably looks different from, you know, within Spotify to within Erste Bank. That doesn't mean that one organization can do it right and the other can't. You just have to operate within the context that you're in. So be aware that there may be limitations provided by this substrate, i.e., have we built our temple in the right place? But it should not be a thing that makes you stop and give up because you say, well, therefore, the root cause of every problem stops here. Okay, I know we're running out of time. So very quickly, what can you do with this? I was going to say tomorrow, but tomorrow's a Sunday. What can you do with this on Monday? Well, I think there's three categories. There's discovery, assessment, and there's challenging it. Let's look at each of those. One of those is use this just as a discussion starter to try and get a sense of, you know, what do people feel about this, or is this teasing out the appropriate connections that people see in terms of what is limiting our success with testing. So use it to see if it helps with root cause analysis. If we had something wrong, we believe there's something wrong in our process, try to sort of scratch beneath the surface. Maybe this will give you a language that helps you to articulate, do we think this is a problem in this category? Is this a problem of management and leadership, or is it something that's a little closer to our own control? Another thing you can do is use it as an assessment tool. This is the context in which I tend to use this a lot because I go into organizations and I'm asked to sort of give some kind of view of how they're doing. So yeah, you can use this as a survey either at the team level or wider at an organization level. I take the instruction from this morning, that is, surveys do tend to suck. You're really using this just as a first layer of data gathering. And one of the things that I like to do with this is to have people score for each of these categories, separately score their rating of how successful are we in this context, and also how important is this to our overall success. So what does that mean? It might mean you'll have a survey that ends up looking roughly like this. Choose your topic and put that in some appropriate, turn that into some appropriately worded question for your context and say, well, how good are we at this? And how important is this to us? And so you can get all sorts of interesting combinations. So there are people who say, well, yeah, we do that quite well, but at the end of the day, that doesn't matter to us. So that would be the team structures. Yes, we've got them, but it's only medium importance compared to other things. Maybe someone's saying, config management, yes, we've finally got a handle on that, and that is critical to our success. Or testability, that's the thing that's killing us. We suck at this, and yeah, it's the thing we need to get right in order to succeed. So by allowing people to provide their opinions on these things, that's where you can get really interesting data on where are the discrepancies. That's a fantastic conversation starter. When somebody's rated something as highly important, somebody else hasn't, or indeed someone's rated this as we do this really well, someone else has said we do it really badly, those variances are the discussion points. So I agree, don't use the survey as a way of saying, well, on average, here's our prioritized list of stuff to fix. Use this as a way of saying, we need to talk because we've got very different opinions on the importance of this or that. So it's kind of your first step. Your third option, of course, is leave it behind. You could say, no, that's fine, but this is not appropriate to us. If you're going to take this option, and of course it's a valid option to you, what I'd ask you to do is justify that decision. So go and share with your colleagues and say, this is why I don't think this is quite right for us. Or maybe, I saw one or two useful things in here, and here's how I would change it, or this is what I would add. That's a good and healthy thing to do. So understand in your context, what would be a better model? What would be a model that is closer to the real thing of your organization? Because this is a wrong model. It might be useful. I would like you to go out and find the model that's right for you. I was going to suggest that's a good time to ask questions, and I will allow some questions. I've got one or two extra things to say, so I'm not entirely wrapped up, but the other stuff are sort of, less important than your questions if you have them. So if there are any questions, I give a free book to the best question. Signed by Gojko Edzic, so it's actually worth something. No questions? Okay, the book gets sold on eBay. I was going to give you the real book, but you can have the download anyway. If you photograph that URL, you can have the copy of the book that Gojko, Tom Roden and I wrote about 50 quick ideas to improve your tests for your mobile device or Kindle. I think everyone who needs that has got it. And the other thing that I wanted to mention is I am back in your lovely city again quite soon, next month, December 5th, on a different topic, on the topic of improving your user stories. And that's at TechTalk, Monday the 5th of December. And that's me done. Thank you very much.